o'clock, so we'll start this meeting of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is the first formal meeting of the municipal year. Welcome, everyone. First things first, do we have any apologies for absence? Okay, I think I saw an email from Councillor Fletcher saying that he's going to be late. If he turns up, he turns up. I mean, just on that item, a small point to note. I think I saw an email from one of the Democratic Service clerks saying that members of Cabinet had given their apologies. Just for clarity, I think for future reference, that apologies really should be only for members of the committee. As I've said, Cabinet members are free to attend. There will be times they will attend to introduce items or give a report, but I don't think there's an expectation that they attend every meeting. So we note their apologies, but it's important we have that distinction between the executive and the committee. So I don't think we need to record their apologies at every meeting. Okay, item 3, items of urgent business have not been notified of any urgent items, but I'll just defer to the officers and the urgent items. Okay, thank you. So do we have any declarations of interest from members? None from me. Thank you, no declarations of interest. So the first substantive item then is item 5, Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee Responsibilities. And I'll hand over to Claire or Lucy or no. Oh, apologies, minutes. Yeah, there's 3 sets of minutes that we need to approve. I mean, it's in some respects, I think there's some members of the committee who weren't at any of those 3 meetings. I was at 2 of them, so I'm looking at Councillor Carey, who was the chair. If you're happy with them, I'll move that.
Thank you, Chair. I was in the hot seat for all 3 of them, and they all look okay to me.
Thank you. I know that Councillor Green was diligently at all of them as well. So, okay, are we happy to take the minutes then on Councillor Carey's recommendation? Thank you. Minutes are approved. So now we go to item 5.
Thank you, Chair. So this relates to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee responsibilities. This document was agreed by full council in March 2024 and outlines the new responsibilities of the committee. This is just included in tonight's agenda for information purposes, but I thought I'd raise with the committee that following the presentation at the full council meeting, there's been a revision regarding substitutes. So there will now be 2 substitutes per political group, and this will be updated within the refreshed ONS chapter of the Constitution. Do members have any questions on that at all?
Are there any comments or questions? No? Okay, as you say, it's only to know. I think we agreed at the informal meeting that we would have few or no items to note as such. So this is, I think, just an exception to that rule. Just a quick question for me. I don't know if I've misunderstood it, but the protocol refers to committees. It refers to overview committees and scrutiny committees in different descriptions. We don't have, obviously, separate committees. Could you just clarify that for my benefit, please?
Yeah, so I think they're just kind of used interchangeably. The protocol and the responsibilities are written by the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, and they're a national body. So they've tailored their format to us, and they're used interchangeably, but they mean the same thing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, fine. Okay, so no more questions, no more comments? I think that's noted then in that case. Thank you. So the next item is the communication strategy.
You're rattling through the agenda, Chair. It's lovely to see you all. I'm Louise Neelan. I'm the fairly new Assistant Director for Communications and Engagement at Thurrock. I joined in April during one pre-election period, and then we promptly went into another one. So we haven't had much chance to actually get going with a huge amount of communicating or engaging for that matter, but we've used that time well to start to draw together plans. We have made some subtle changes to the way that we communicate with residents, particularly around tone of voice and best practice in digital comms. But what we really need is a clear strategy that sets out how we're going to talk to and listen to residents, particularly given the problems that Thurrock has had in recent years and the need to rebuild trust. We know where we are with residents, we know what a difficult time it's been, and for staff too, and we all see comms and engagement as a part of the kind of moving forward with that. The reason I'm here, as I understand it, is that at your initial session, you identified communications as something that you were interested in, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity as we start to pull together our strategy, that we speak to you early, we get your input and your thoughts. Obviously, you are out every day talking to residents, you are the eyes and ears of the council, and so to have your input and insight as we develop the strategy is really invaluable. So I shall rattle through. I know you've all had a chance to read this. I won't read slides. I know that's not great, but I'll assume you've read it, and we'll just go through and get to the questions. So I think I just wanted to set out why we need one of these. Why, most councils have a clear strategy, but why is this important? I think particularly for us, it's really important to demonstrate that kind of honesty and transparency that perhaps has been lacking in recent years, or that there's been a perception that it's been lacking, helping to rebuild that trust. There's also something about prioritising. We're not a huge team. We've got a reasonable sized comms and engagement team that we're pulling together and working together more closely. But obviously, there are a million things we could communicate about. We need to prioritise and focus on the things that really matter to residents. And we need to be consistent in how we're speaking about things so that people don't hear one story from one officer and something else from the council's channels. I'm incredibly passionate about comms and engagement. I think that, the days of a press office, spin doctors, that kind of perception of what we do has changed dramatically over time. I think COVID really brought that to the fore, but things have changed. Communications, yes, we do want to celebrate the successes of the council because that's important in rebuilding trust and boosting the morale of our staff too, but primarily we're here to help the council achieve its objectives. So that might be about bringing in income, it might be about getting more consultation responses and so that people feel listened to. It might be about involving people in their decision making, and it might also be about influencing other decision makers, national decision makers, on behalf of our residents and local businesses. So I just wanted to put down what I think the kind of current context we're working in is. So next slide, please. So how we're currently seen on the table, not particularly well. We're best known nationally for the recent mistakes that have led to intervention. People are really unhappy with us because not only is there a sense that the council made bad decisions, but that they're feeling that in their pocket and in their daily lives because council tax has increased and there have been changes to services. So we know that's all really difficult for local people, and we know that as a result of that, trust is really low. So the ways that we want to change that is around showing that we are on the side of residents. We want people to feel some sort of hope. Thurrock's an amazing place. You look outside, we've got the river on our doorstep, we've got lovely countryside, we've got all these fabulous things. And yet, we can see as people, if you come from Gray's High Street, you could sort of sense the river's there, but you can't quite get to it. And there's all those kind of things that we want people to feel the borough's there for them, it's for them to enjoy. And we want to show that the council's got a plan. We're getting organised, we're on top of things. The new corporate plan sets out a way forward. We want people to feel confidence in that as well. All of those things are iterative. I know we're not going to change that all on day one. Next slide, please. I think it's really important that we focus on who it is that we're here to serve. You all know this, but just the recent census did show that Thurrock is changing, certainly in terms of its population, but also in its diversity. I think it's really interesting that although we hear a lot from older people in the borough, we've actually got a really young population, and the average age is just 36. We've got a range of tenants, leaseholders, homeowners, etc., but the majority are homeowners. got a significant population living with a disability. Those will come from the recent census, but we've also got some data that shows that 92% of our residents use the internet. Now, that might seem like a random collection of statistics, but actually for me and my team, that's really important information because that helps us focus on how we should be communicating with residents, the issues that we should be talking about with them, and also the voice and the tone that we use in different messages and different subjects. Next slide, please. So we did some research before I joined. I think this is a few years old now, but these kind of things don't change dramatically year on year. Looking at how people receive information, where they go for information, and where they find out about the council. This is really important. We will always use a mix of methods to get information out to residents, but we need to be meeting them in the places where they want to find the information, and primarily that is our website. Not a huge surprise. What's the first thing anyone does if they want to know their bin collection day or whatever? They'll Google it. So that's really helpful for us, and it's really important for us to focus a lot of energy on our website. Our email newsletter is the next most popular item. That's pretty consistent across the country. Lots of e-newsletters don't follow particularly good practice, and they often can be quite, if the council only focuses on what the council does, they're not always very exciting. What we've tried to do over the last couple of months is bring in lots more community news. So we're celebrating what local people are doing. We're talking about what's going on at the Thames side. We're encouraging people to get out to Grangewater, promoting benefits and things that people can find locally. And we've seen, anecdotally, people are finding that quite positive. But there's lots more we can do here. And of course, we will always want this range of places where we share information. We know there are some really lively Facebook groups locally. And of course, the local media plays an important role as well. Next slide, please. So I just put down the kind of focus that we think we need for the coming year, and I keep writing rebuilding trust. I've realised it's on almost every slide, but you know that is really primarily what we need to focus on. There's much more we can do to speak to a range of different groups in our communities. I think when looking at some of the data we've had in recent consultations over the last few years, we don't always reach everybody. We only reach certain groups, and that's really important that we hear from a range of voices. We want to communicate clearly about the services people care about, and that's where I think it'd be really interesting to hear from you. What are the things I know, speaking to some councillors, there's a lot of local people talk about potholes, they talk about bins, but what are some of the other things that they're really interested in? We want to get out into the community. I know councillors are already out there, but officers need to get out there too and really talk to people and really focus on proper engagement. So not just fill out a quick consultation, but actually get out and listen and talk to people and work with them on the services that they want. So there's a huge amount to do, and on top of that, we want people to invest in Thurrock. We want Thurrock to keep growing, benefiting local people with jobs, etc. So there's a lot to do. Next slide, please. And here we just put down kind of our emerging key messages, just something for you to have a look at and give us your thoughts on. But again, they articulate the fact that we're sorry for the mistakes that have been made. We want to move forward with residents. And there are great opportunities that can come out of this challenge and lots to celebrate in the borough. Next slide, please. Any good communications and engagement strategy will have some campaigns that it will run. You'll have helped promote many of these. COVID vaccine was a clear one where you use a range of techniques to achieve clear objectives, targeting different groups in the population where you know it's needed. But councils run campaigns on, it could be promoting cost of living advice under one badge. It could be health awareness campaigns, things like make sure you have your health check, testing for different things, etc. We've been talking to the colleagues who work with our youth cabinet and our children in care about potentially doing a joint campaign with them on some of the issues that they care about. So there's a huge potential for that. You can't do lots of really proper data-driven campaigns in 1 year. So I think we need to focus in on the things that the data show us and residents are telling us are important locally. So that's something that we'll come to at the end. Next slide, please. But also, we are here to tell people what's going on, to make sure they're aware of council services, to make sure that they know what's going on in their community, to promote that sense of community cohesion and just community. So we will continue to use all our channels to do that. It's really interesting when you look at the data, which are the stories that people click on most. They love a prosecution, they love, you know, dodgy landlord find, or this story, someone told to clear up a mess in East Tilbury. But they also like some quite surprising things. So our e-newsletter last week, the most clicked item was a sewing workshop, sewing for beginners in the community, run by one of our partner organisations. It's not necessarily anything to do with the council, but we're getting cheaply and easily, we're getting information that help to kind of engender that sense of positivity about a place and also show that we're useful to residents. We produced, also, I don't know if any of you saw it, but we produced a magazine for tenants and leaseholders. A couple of months ago, we had some essential fire safety information that we needed to get out, statutory obligation to do it. For the same amount of money of getting those messages out, we managed to produce a magazine which also featured residents, case studies, a bit of positivity about the volunteering work that people were doing. So that's the kind of thing we want to do, celebrate community, celebrate residents, but also make sure we're getting that important information out to people. And the big lunches is another really good example of that positive local community work. Next slide, please. So that was a whistle through of the kind of key things that we're thinking need to be important parts of the strategy. So I gave you 4 questions in your papers, and perhaps, Chair, we could run through those, or I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Louise. Just turn your mic off, please. Thank you. I've certainly got some questions or comments, but I'll open it up to the committee first. I'm sure I've got quite a lot to say. Councillor Green, you signalled first.
Thank you, Chair. You said 92% of residents use IT. Does that include actually have access to IT, or is it they know how to use IT?
Sorry, I'm trying to remember the exact wording, but I think it said they do use the internet. So it was there were then follow-up questions that sort of asked, where do you use it? Do you use it on a smartphone? Do you go to the library? But that was the proportion, which is high and good, but actually shows us that, yeah, the majority of residents do have the ability to access information online and do it.
Thank you, Chair. With the other, we've still got 8% of people who don't use IT. Do we know where that 8% is based, or roughly what type of people?
I can have a look and see. I mean, we could take a guess. It tends to be people from older generations who are less digitally enabled, but not only that. We can cut some of that data and have a look, but also we are going to be doing some more comprehensive research with residents this year, so that's the kind of thing we can unpick there.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Just regarding the survey from 2021, do you know how many actual residents took part in it?
Is this the communications one? Yeah. So it was, I don't have the exact number, but we used an external company who produced statistically significant information. So although it will never be 50% of residents, but they will make sure that they have a representative group that you can then make those sort of statistical decisions on.
Thank you for that. The reason I ask is because obviously this is from 2021, and depending on which time of 2021 depends on the engagement of the time because of COVID and all that sort of thing. And also this building wasn't sort of here, and I'd be interested in sort of an updated sort of survey looking at how many vulnerable residents perhaps use front of house as part of communication. You know, the idea of not necessarily being digitally literate or whatever, but actually you know, going down to the council to speak to someone. And I think that's it's kind of a point I think Councillor Green was sort of making about vulnerable residents and people who are not as sort of digitally savvy. So I wonder if there's any plans for an updated survey which also includes sort of the non-digital options that people want to use.
Yes, absolutely. So we are looking to do more research this year. I think all the data can show us is the sort of the big picture. So we know that most people will access information online because that's just the nature of how, but we also know there will be a proportion that won't and can't, and that we need to make sure we get information to them too. And that's why that mix is so important. It's why having a hard copy magazine is essential if you've got really essential safety information, whereas if it's other things, you know, I think for almost everything we've done since we've been here, where we're promoting, say, piece of engagement or an event, there'll be posters in libraries, you know, we'll have things downstairs here as well. So we are trying to cater to all of those different groups, but you're right, we need to make sure that we understand exactly how people are accessing us.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I ask my question, I think just a suggestion, but that 92% accessing information by via the internet may, I mean, I think it's a bit of a circular thing because it may well reflect the fact that if you're looking for information, and bearing in mind that chart was about consuming information, not necessarily engaging, you're very likely, or sorry, you're most likely to find what you're looking for on the net. And particularly since we have opened this building, it's very difficult to come in and find somebody to talk to. So it doesn't surprise me that 92% of people are finding the information they want to on the net, because actually there's not that much of an alternative. So it's just an observation. I think it may reflect that as much as preference. In terms of questions, do you have any measures in place yet for your, particularly your communication with residents? Are there any measures that you have at least sketched out to say, well, okay, we will know we're being successful when X?
Not overall, but for individual campaigns, you would always have clear objectives. So, and we're not running any campaigns at the moment, although we're starting to develop some. So you would start with, what is the issue? Who are the audiences that we're trying to reach? Because they, you know, I don't know, take a public health one because it's nice and easy. You always have good data with public health. We may be trying to target people of a certain age group, people of a certain ethnicity. We'd then be looking at measures to see, did people come forward and take up those checks? And then we'd look back and see. So you can measure in two ways. You measure the output, which is the most important bit, but you can also measure actually how people engage. So every week when we send out the resident newsletter, we look at how many people have clicked on each item, we look at what the popular content is, we try and then put more of that popular content in next time, we sort of play around with placement and things. So we're constantly looking at that, same with our social media. And as we start to get into, we're launching a few consultations at the moment. We've done them in completely different ways, and we'll be looking at, so for example, the walking and cycling consultation that we're just starting to roll out, we've cut that by local area. So we'll be able to see if people in Orsett are engaging loads in this and people in Grays aren't, we might want to put a bit more effort into getting things into Thameside or et cetera, et cetera. So yes, you kind of do that over time. But with a campaign where you know exactly what you're trying to achieve, it's easier to then have those clear objectives.
Thanks for that. Just to sort of make things a bit clearer, communications is my trade. I've been, in fact, I had hair when I started in communications. So absolutely, totally get the, you know, the fact that any campaign, any particular, and relatively, it's easy to set objectives for a campaign. But I think there is an opportunity here for you to be setting objectives for communications. We had at the last full council last week, we had the publication of the if you like, the grand plan, which has been worked on across parties. There are a number of priorities in there. There are a number of clear measures, if you like, for the council as a whole. And I believe that you could, as a communications team, pull out 4 or 5 very useful and very concrete objectives that would fit into those strategies and would also drive what you're doing. So I would urge you to have a look at that and think, okay, what do we take out of that? What are our objectives? Because some of these questions you've asked us, I think actually would almost start to answer themselves if you had those strategic objectives in place.
Absolutely, yeah. You're preaching to the converted on that. We will be doing that. I think the coming here to hear from you sort of quite raw was done intentionally because we want this to feel so like something that everyone is involved with and everyone owns. But no, absolutely, we will be going through that and picking out the things where we can have the most impact, whether it's getting people to sign up for a licensing scheme or bringing in income in different ways. I mean, yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
I think just for clarity, I think what Councillor Fletcher was referring to is a very valid point, is the corporate plan and how the communication strategy aligns with that. It's one of the questions I was going to ask, but I think you've answered that. Councillor Abbas?
Thank you for your report. Just on Councillor Karen's earlier point on survey. No, obviously, since COVID, a lot of things have changed, even in terms of services. A lot of services have moved online. And this survey is obviously based in 2021. And even looking at this 2021, if you see, I don't find out any information, that's 15%. So what plan do we have to reach out to these set target of 15%?
So that's possibly the most interesting bit of all of this for me. I think I come from Thurrock, where we had an enormously diverse population, and particularly through the pandemic, learned a huge amount about using faith leaders, community groups, voluntary sector, working with GPs, because different groups have different levels of trust in public services, and the more you can learn about that and understand that, the more likely you are to be able to reach those community groups. I think we haven't had a huge amount of capacity here on the engagement side to get out, and there's been a lot of good work that has happened, but we need to go further, we need to go deeper, and also the census shows that things are changing. Our population doesn't stay still, more people are moving in, there's change, so we absolutely need to do that, and it will be working with the people who are on the ground who know those communities, and finding the ways in and working out whether we need to think about language and all of those things. So that's going to be a really kind of exciting part of this strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And this also linked with your next slide, which is proposed focus for next year. So it says we are ensuring, especially youngsters and different ethnic backgrounds. And we have early noted there is ethnic communities are around 19%. So how will we reach, or obviously you did mention something, but I think in 2022, we did agree a strategy to publish these key cultural and religious messages. So the first year it was published in routine, the days were agreed, but then suddenly it disappears. So I literally have to remind officers 2-3 days ago with follow-up emails, and sometimes even, those messages disappear. So how can we kind of make sure we are kind of reaching out to these communities?
I think we have to try and see what different things work. I think so one of the recent consultations I looked at from last year, we had really, really poor take-up from people who had any kind of different ethnic background. And that's not okay, because we represent all of our communities. I don't yet have that clear picture of where different communities, say sort of broadly, we know different areas in the borough, but we need to look at that. We need to work at how do we get out? Are we putting, if we're trying to promote a specific thing to a certain community, are we getting those posters not only in the libraries, but also in the mosque or in the church? Are we looking at how we can get information out through, huge amounts of information is shared now just on WhatsApp groups. Are we getting to that key person, the person that's trusted in that community, and asking them to share it on our behalf? So I think there's some mapping we need to do. The engagement team does hold some of that information, but we need to build that. We need to really understand some of those communities So I don't have all the answers yet, but I can give you a firm commitment that that's something we really want to focus on.
Councillor Howden.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things I'm quite concerned about is, we've got an increasingly growing transient community in the borough because of London overspill and the growth of housing across the C2C corridor, and especially the proliferation of HMOs. We don't want to get into a position where, because people are just using Thurrock for a place to stay and commuting out for jobs, that we end up with a disengaged section of the population. We know that there are certain wards where, for example, election turnout is a solid 15% behind other wards, where GP registration sometimes is 20% behind other wards. And my concern is with how the council was communicating in the past. We've used really, really analogue methods to try and talk to people. So in my own ward, there's a huge proliferation of HMOs. By and large, landlords will pay council tax themselves and then surcharge their tenants. So for sections of my community, you'll have council communications going to one landlord when that landlord has 16 tenants. So what more can we do about that population to try and properly integrate them into the Thurrock community? Because by and large, these people are not going to the Thames side. They're not absorbing content from the authority. Things like waste collection. When the council launched a consultation on the introduction of a kitchen waste collection, it caused significant problems in Stamford and Corringham, especially around 3rd Avenue, where there was a very large boom of HMOs because we'd communicated with a landlord, not with tenants, and as a result we had some properties with 10, 12, 14 individuals who had one tiny bin to share. So what more can we do to properly integrate these people into the Thurrock community?
That's a challenge. Bless you, Dan. I mean, that's not unique to Thurrock, obviously. And lots of London boroughs have that sort of transient population, and it is a real challenge. And as you say, if we're not communicating directly with them through the few methods that we do, through the door every year, we need to look at that. If we think often with something like that, you'll find that you have something specific, you need to get to that audience. I mean, an example is e-bike batteries, which are a massive fire risk, which are often clogging up doorways in HMOs, and that's a big issue. So if we identified that as an issue, we could get information out and we could say, and while you're reading this information, sign up for our e-newsletter. So it's just using every single opportunity or interaction with those people to try and get them interested. But at the end of the day, it is quite difficult because councils aren't hugely of interest to a lot of people if they haven't got, as you say, kind of maybe kids in local schools or they haven't been here for a long time. And they're not paying council tax direct to us. So we'll have to think of some creative ways to do that, but it's normally best if it's done around an issue. So if we can work with you and, if this is a specific thing in your ward, we could look at what are some of the issues that we want to talk to those people about and then try and kind of draw them in that way. It's something we'll have to explore. We don't have all the answers immediately.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Chair. Going further on James's point about communication, have we looked at other authorities with regards to best practice, how they communicate with their residents, and sort of picked out bits from, might be certain authorities do certain things really well and other authorities do a different part really well, and looked at that to sort of try and incorporate that in so that we could use the best that's out there, best practice on different authorities to get our communications better?
Yes. So I'm part of the LGA's communications peer review group. So I've done several peer reviews in different councils. I also play a role in the National Local Government Communications Network. So we are always looking for case studies and running conferences and things where we share that best practice. And if I see things that I think we can do here, absolutely. And same with colleagues. I think we're also looking particularly on the engagement side because there is so much ambition here around properly engaging, working with communities on designing services and things like that. We're looking at which councils have been doing some really good work in that area, and I was in a meeting today where we were looking at things that have happened in Camden, in Islington, in other part, Plymouth, I think, has come up. So we're picking out those examples and thinking, would that work here? Do we try that here and then tweak it, make it Thurrock? But absolutely. I mean, that I don't think most ideas don't come from scratch. If you can replicate, if you can take something and make it even better, then absolutely, I'm all for that.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, and I might be off of the line here a little bit. Chair, you'll indulge me. It's my first time sitting on this committee. Given that the aspirations of the corporate plan and where we're going as a council has got to be IT driven, do you believe that our IT system is robust enough going forward in order to be able to absorb where we are at the moment? Do you think it's going to require upgrading? Do we have capital investment in order to facilitate what we're trying to achieve in relation to the IT system? And are we mindful of it for potential failures? And given, from my point of view, there's a lot of computer systems that have been relied on, that have been in the public eye a lot recently, Fujitsu, for example. If we're going to buy in, and we're not going to use our own, do you think what we've got and what we're going to have going forward is robust enough to achieve the aspirations of A, the corporate plan, and B, what we're trying to achieve here on this committee?
If it's okay, I'm going to defer to my colleague Dan, who is responsible for IT. He'd be much better equipped to answer that.
So I was fearing Louise was going to do that. So I don't have the answer, but I do know as part of the process by which we are looking to automate and modernise the system, part of that project is looking at the systems that sit behind it, all the way from our cybersecurity arrangements through to the servers and the staff and the skills that we've got. It's a perfectly legitimate question, but if you wanted to take that forward, we'd have to come back again and can answer those questions and bring the experts rather than just the figurehead along, if that's all right.
Yeah, I through the chair, I completely understand where you're coming from. I know it's a loaded question, Dan, but nevertheless, we might as well start as we means to go on in this committee, and I do think we could be importing a hell of a lot of risk into trying to get this going at any real speed, and of course burden ourselves with a hell of a lot of cost on top of the dire straits that we're already in. So I believe it's a legitimate question. I believe we'll be coming back to this probably September, but I thank you for your comments, and I look forward to further along these lines going forward. No further comments, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Carrion and then Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much, Chair. A separate question to the survey. You spoke about press engagement, but within Thurrock, to the best of my knowledge, I think we only have one Thurrock-based journalist who operates sort of with Thurrock. So, how are we sort of doing press engagement with only having such a narrow sort of outlet for sort of a professional press, if you like?
So I think it's a shame we haven't got this bit of information, but I would imagine it would be in the slides that we had from the 2021 survey with all the caveats around that time, which would show that residents are much more likely to read national papers than they are locals. And you could probably take a stab at what the titles are. Obviously, getting into the national papers is really difficult, and we've been in it for all the wrong reasons. So our ambition would be, if we're going to get into the nationals, we want it to show progress and that we're doing good things. In terms of local press, it's not too bad. We've obviously got, I think you're probably referring to Nub News, but we've also, there is the Thurrock Gazette, which is handed out in Morrison's. It used to go through doors, I believe, but it's a smaller print run, but people do pick it up and look at it. We've got BBC Essex, who engage with us really well. I was quite surprised, given how big the county is, but they came to the elections. They've engaged with us a lot. And there's something called, I think it's Heart FM, who's actually interviewing Councillor Kent today on the corporate plan. So they are interested in us. We are interesting, obviously, but we've had some good coverage since we've been allowed to do that, which has only been a couple of weeks. Interest in the corporate plan and in some of our other stories, and they are an important part of what we do in the mix. So I don't think we're badly off for local news.
Thank you. Yeah, so beyond sort of sending out sort of communication emails, like press releases, basically, is there a particular strategy we're using with particular publications? Because ultimately, I know the BBC are interested in us, but a lot of that interest really hit when all the bankruptcy came out and stuff, because before that, there wasn't a lot of Thurrock news. So as we aim to move beyond the shadow of the situation we're in, beyond sending out sort of good news stories, if you like, is there any other way we're trying to engage with the outlets you've mentioned?
I think at the moment it's sort of shameless opportunism. Whenever we have a good story, we will sell it in, and we will hope that they're interested. It's not that hard to get a regional interested. If you've got something quirky, as I say, enforcement stories are always popular. Anything sort of unusual that's happening in the borough. We're also looking at filming locally to try and sort of, both because it can potentially bring an income, but also really show the borough in its all sort of diverse light. So it's just, it is about, every time we've got a good story, I want to know about it, and we will get it out there. And if it's if there isn't some other massive story, then we'll normally probably get a fair bite of the cherry. So.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, if we're talking comments as well as just questions, a couple of comments, if I may. I do like the priorities that you've set out. Scribbling away, I think for me they come down to three things. They come down to proactive, transparent, and a human touch. And totally agree with all three. I really do think that that's exactly what we need, that we don't have at the minute. So great. You were asking about the perception, and I'm happy to hear from my colleagues whether they agree or disagree. I think the word incompetent comes up a lot. And it doesn't come up as a word, but it comes up, it's implied, is uncaring. The feeling that whoever runs Thurrock Council doesn't really care about the normal person. So when we talk about losing trust, it isn't just about things that have actually happened. It's a perception that goes back a long time before then, and is partly about things like how difficult it is to get to talk to anybody in the council. Now that's, for me, that comes into the third point I want to make. I'd really encourage you. Now I know, like I say, the reason I mentioned that I've been in the trade is that, generally speaking, if you're looking at sort of a communications plan or whatever, it tends to be, yes, us, the communications people, the plan is about what we're going to do. I'd really encourage you to look along the line and be quite nosy and be quite invasive, because I think one of the biggest barriers, communication-wise, that we have with residents is actually not the news items, the sort of the big ticket items, but the daily communications and the tone of them and the complexity of them. And unfortunately, one great piece of news can be undone like that by a bunch of letters going out which make residents feel absolutely unvalued, accused. There is a job to be done in just taking a look at our standard communications and in many cases ripping them up and starting again. I don't think there are many places in which AI can actually improve communication. It probably could there, because the AI would probably be more sympathetic than whoever wrote that stuff. That, I think, ought to be part of your, when you look at your page 60 in your priorities, that, I feel, ought to be one of them, which is to look and be, feel free to be nosy about it, but look at the tone of how this council expresses itself day to day. And I think you'll find that, it is so far away from what you want to present that something needs to be done. And that needs to be, I think, a stream of your plan.
Thank you. I completely agree. And yes, it's an oversight. It should be in there. It is something that I've really been passionate about. And I think in the first couple of weeks, we had a really unfortunate letter that went out to a resident. And sort of all hell broke loose from there. So we know the power of the word and we know how it makes people feel. So we rewrote that template immediately and changed the tone. I've also been working with some colleagues in regeneration for letters that are going out to people en masse around certain projects, just bringing it back to plain English, making it clear, making it, about the resident, not about the 10 schemes that, we're kind of quoting back at them. So no, absolutely. I think that's really important. It can be labour intensive and time consuming. So actually what we need to do is work with colleagues in those teams to help them understand how to do that.
Thank you.
I'm just going to jump in at that point, because lots of points that have been raised, questions have been asked, they're points that I was going to ask as well, but of all the points that have been raised, that's the one I personally would reiterate. If you take anything away from here, I've got some other questions, but I'll come back to them. But if you're going to have a communication strategy, I think, as Councillor Fletcher has said, it can't just be about what's churned out through a very small team. It needs to be root and branch. It's not only the comms team that talk to our residents. All services seem to have almost a silo approach to communications. They all have their own communications approach. I've just got an example here. This is from my ward, and it's in relation to the Black Shots high-rise redevelopment. There's 3 communications which have gone out. They all look entirely different from each other. One of them, you only know it's from Thurrock Council because you have to look at the email addresses to actually see they've got Thurrock Council in them. It doesn't even have the logo on it. And I just think that we have an utterly uncorporate approach to communication. When somebody gets something from us, there should be absolutely no doubt it's from the council. And it's not. And that's just one example. It's completely different looking communication that you have to read from top to bottom to even realise it's from the council. It even starts off, we are doing this. And you think, well, who are we? Who is it from? Even the headlines are all different. So my question is to reiterate the point that Councillor Fletcher has said, we need a much more corporate approach across the whole organisation. But the tone as well, it's almost like it's council officers talking to council officers. There's just an assumption that the person reading it knows what we know when they don't. And it talks about things like the cabinet has decided and we've got consent from the planning committee. It should be Thurrock Council has decided, not different components of the council. So we need to be much more corporate. When we're talking about decisions, they're council decisions. I know it's different if you're doing a press release to highlight a particular decision that was taken at a committee, but this doesn't do that. It's talking about decisions which were made months ago. So one of the points I would make, and it's, as I say, a reiteration of what Councillor Fletcher has said, we really must become more corporate in how our communication looks. It needs to look identical. When I get a letter from my bank or my utility provider, I instantly know it's them. I don't get a letter, then the next week get one that looks completely different. I have to read all of it before I know who it's from. So I think for me that's something I would really ask you to take away. It's not just about what the comms team puts out, it's what the whole organisation puts out. It has to look the same and it has to be much better in tone and it has to be clear that who our target audience is, not us talking to each other. I've got some more questions, but I think Councillor Howden and Councillor Green, did you indicate? So Councillor Howden first and Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Fletcher made a really important point, largely talking about the tone of letters. Strategy should follow what we think are specific problems. And the slight concern I've got about this narrative that we have to restore trust in the council, it almost like makes it sound like we want the council to be beloved. You know, I can't think of go to Labour, Liberal Democrat-led Southend, Independent-led Castle Point, or Conservative-led Essex County. I doubt very much anywhere in the country you will find a collection of residents who are enamoured with their local authority. So if the strategy is that we want everyone to trust us and like us, I mean, we're not a dating app. It's just not going to happen. What Councillor Fletcher was talking about the tone of letters, in my mind, that's the way you launch a strategy. You list the very specific problems you think we've got with our comms. And certainly with our comms, I think the tone of letters is correct. I think certainly when we send letters to vulnerable people and it is simply signed off, yours sincerely, Thurrock Council Adult Services, I mean, that can be not only frightening for an older resident reading it, but if you're a family member who is then trying to chase that letter, you've got no idea who it is in the council you can talk to. So rather than just trying to focus on being trusted, which I'm sure is something every authority in the country would want and very few actually achieve, I think it would be better to have a list of what we think are the very specific mistakes that we have made with comms over the last 5, 10, 20 years. I think the tone of letters is a good start, and I'm sure we can all list other examples of where we think that comms, for whatever reason, over the years just haven't worked properly. And I suppose that's what I'm missing in the strategy. I get your comment about there is a lack of trust in the council. I'm not convinced how any authority fixes that, but I think we need to almost have, I don't think Councillor Fletcher quite said audit, but a specific list of the things that we think we've screwed up with comms over the years, and then just systematically use the strategy to start knocking them off one at a time. Or indeed, admitting where some of the problems you can't knock off with the best will in the world.
Thank you. That's absolutely fine on the, I mean, yes, of course, we need to look at where we need to improve, and there's lots of room for improvement. I think on the trust point, I would probably respectfully challenge that we're in a similar boat to other councils. I think we're in a much, much worse situation. And I think even just to get back to that mildly unpopular baseline that most councils have would be, that's a journey we have to go on. And the reason that's important is if residents don't trust us, they don't listen to what we say, they don't do what we ask them to do, and we will struggle to make Thurrock the kind of place where people, if people don't like our bin collections and they don't believe we're doing it for good reasons, they might fly tip. And then we'll either spend money clearing up the fly tipping, or they'll feel that they don't like where they live. So it becomes this sort of downward spiral. So I do think it is important that we at least get back to that, yes, the place that most councils are, which is, not brilliant, but better than where we are at the moment.
I don't disagree, but respectfully, I think what I would say is that residents care slightly less about what the plan is for bin collections. They actually care more about us actually delivering on said plan. I get far more complaints that my bin was missed or the IT system doesn't work so I can't renew my parking permit than I do actually about the concept of having parking permits. So it is again about what are the problems. Are they a problem of communication, or are they a problem with the logistics of the authority? And if the aim is just almost a vague sense of trust, I just don't think that's specific enough. There needs to be very concrete, specific objectives that the comm strategy deals with. Again, going back to what Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Maney said, the tone of letters, the uncorporate nature of communications, these are very specific problems that we can fix and just tick off the list.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the next stage. We need that. What is it we're actually trying to achieve here, and those measurable things. This is a sort of discussion aid, a starter for 10, but we will definitely get to that.
Just something you said in answering Councillor Howden's question. You said we need to get back to where other local authorities are now. I do think we have to press the point that we're talking as members here, not officers, members who talk to our communities, we live in our communities. Thurrock has never been, in my opinion, where other local authorities are. We've never been as good as them. The perception of residents of the council, in my opinion, has always been poor. So getting back to where we were isn't really good enough for me. And one of the reasons Thurrock has such a bad reputation is because the council has always seemed very remote from people. Trying to access people to talk to, trying to get a satisfactory response is, for many residents, like trying to get blood out of a stone. So I think we should never run away with the idea that we were in a really good place, we're on a par with other local authorities, and now we're not. This strategy can't just look at getting us back to where we were, because we weren't in a good place to start with. I hate referring to residents as customers, because they're not customers. They can't go and buy services elsewhere. But our customer satisfaction was always low, certainly when I'm on the doorstep talking to people, because they can't get access to this council. And when you look at the quality of some of the responses that they get, you look at the quality of some of the members' responses, they're appalling. They're just procedural. So I do think we need to recognise from the get-go that just getting back to where we were pre-intervention, that can't be the goal. That wasn't good enough to start with.
No, absolutely. It's about getting to a place with all the frustrations that people have with local government, but to a good place. That's the aim. We want to have a good relationship with residents, but acknowledging that there will always be something that isn't, perfect, because that is the nature of local government. But yeah, we're aiming high with this. Absolutely. We're certainly not being complacent.
Sorry, Councillor Green, did you indicate? Yeah, and have I missed anybody? Then Councillor Jones, and then Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. As you just said, we are aiming high on this strategy, but since intervention, all departments, their budget has been squeezed. Have you thought about getting sponsors, adverts on the bottom of any Facebook ad, email newsletter, to bring in more revenue to the communications department?
It's a great question. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so the filming is one example. We do have the roundabout signs that bring in some income. And we were looking actually at, when we did the housing magazine, about if we wanted to do more of that kind of hard copy communications in the future, whether or not there's a model where we could have it sponsored. Yeah, I think we should be using opportunities. At the same time, if you cram too many adverts into council communications, sometimes it can dilute your message as well. So again, it comes back to what Councillor Kent said about looking at those models of what other councils do and finding there's a whole range of approaches to that. So yes, we should be finding every opportunity to do that. And if you spot something, then please let me know.
Thank you. Apologies if I call you in the wrong order, but I've got Councillor Jones next, then Councillor Fletcher, then Councillor Polston.
Thank you, Chair. Basically, just following up what the Chair has said, getting back to where you were, I'm looking at it like locally you've got forums, and I'm chairman of our local forum, and it's one of the things that's been said for many years. I've been on it quite a few years now. Everyone has a go about the council communications, and you've got a perfectly good thing set there, all in place. We've struggled over the years as a forum with communications with council on many different, shall we say, issues. At one time, our secretary was continually writing emails to council to try and get answers to questions, to try and maybe get officers to come and do presentation at forum on certain issues, important issues, and it wasn't to be. I should say that possibly over the last 6, 7, 8 months, things have started to get better. You know, we had engagement, for example, has come in to meet at council with the highways teams on issues. They would come out at one time and sort of back up what was said at their meetings and the presentation. But what I'm trying to say is you've got TAF, you've got all these forums. Please engage with them a little bit more, and if they write a email in or send something in, you know, just look at that, because that is the residents. You are dealing direct with the residents there. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And yes, there are plans, and both the leader and Chief Exec are really keen and committed to getting out, meeting with the forums, meeting with different groups in the community. So you'll see a lot more of that in the coming months. Everyone's really keen to do that. So yeah, thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. Really just to sort of try and pull some of the points together and probably end up in that case repeating some of what's been said, but totally agree with what's been said, and you know, councillors Maney and Holden have pointed out we need objectives that are reasonable, and as a council I don't think we are ever going to be loved, and we probably don't want to be loved. What we want to be is in a situation where the people that we serve actually feel that they can talk to us. And that isn't there at the minute. We are, as the chair has mentioned, we come across remote, we come across as if we're on another planet. And you know, that's when I say we, the average resident of Thurrock hasn't got a clue whether that's an officer and they're employed, that's a councillor and they're, so that they're all in it together. You know, you're all as bad as each other. We've all heard on the doorstep. So, I mean, when it comes down to it, you know, when we're communicating out to them, fine, we want to communicate about, and we definitely should be communicating about successes, certainly be communicating about what we're doing to improve things. And, you know, yes, we need to be proactively putting that out. Most of the time when they come to us, let's face it, most of them don't communicate with us or even particularly notice we're there unless something's gone wrong. It's the nature of the job. And that's the point at which I think some of this, you know, this is where we really let ourselves down. This is where our tone and our way of dealing with people just is completely at odds with what we might be trying to say at a corporate level. So for me, yeah, I agree with Councillor Holden. Let's maybe not worry about, yeah, our objective is to rebuild trust. For me, no. Our objective should be to demonstrate competence, demonstrate accessibility, demonstrate to people that when they do have a problem, they will get listened to. I think if we can do that effectively, I think the trust then starts to rebuild itself. You know, don't worry about the trust, worry about the things that undermine trust. Deal with them, the trust will start to fix itself.
Councillor Polston.
Thanks, Chair. I know some of this may have been spoken about, and I think you've answered some of it, but I'll go ahead anyway. We've spoken about remoteness quite a lot, and how I think, I mean, I've only been at this a couple months now, but what I found with residents is that they feel like communication is a one-way street. That they feel very much that the council talks at them, not to them. They have no kind of communication or dialogue with the council in any way. And echoing Councillor Jones's point, I feel like community forums are a really good tool to engage. And I found at ours, I mean, my ones in Ockenden have quite a low turnout in general, but I found that the amount of communication we can put out on social media is great, and written communication is great, but I feel like in my experience, and it's very limited, but we can do a whole deal more in 1 hour at a forum engaging with residents than we can with months of social media. And I was just wondering, I know that for officers it would be very difficult to attend every forum in the borough, you know, and I don't think any of us expect officers to be at every forum. Is it possible for not just the communications, but you know, sectors across the council to have some kind of resident engagement meeting here so that residents can come to us, or maybe some a common venue somewhere in the borough, advertised in advance so that all residents across the borough know about it. They can all come and engage, and we can actually have a conversation rather than, you know, residents feel that they're being spoken at rather than spoken to, and you know, that kind of open communication.
Absolutely. And I think Councillor Green was probably there when Dave went down and spoke to Purfleet residents, acknowledging some of the challenges that have been down there. And it seemed to go well. People had a chance to ask questions, feel they were listened to. We definitely want to be doing much more of that. And as part of the visits, there is an idea that we'll open things up to questions and let people do that. Because you're right, it's the most impactful.
Thank you. Any final questions or comments from members? Okay, just to round up then, I think what we've been asked to look at tonight, this isn't a strategy, is it? It's almost laying the groundwork for a strategy. It's hard to, from my perspective, it's hard to disagree with some of it, or a lot of it, but equally it's very difficult to measure or come to a conclusion on it because we haven't, a lot of the things you talk about in here, for example, more visibility, empowerment, involvement, we don't know how you're going to do it. We don't know how we can therefore as a committee measure whether it's a success or not. So my question is, when will we have something a bit more tangible to come back to this committee for us to look at? So rather than just looking at aspirations and ideas, we're actually looking at things we have pledged to do by when and outcomes and that kind of thing.
So that is the strategy. That's what I need to go away and write now with colleagues across the council. That will then, we haven't quite established the route through, but I would imagine we would want to come back to this meeting and share that with you at some point. So if you're...
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I suppose that's what I'm trying to get at when. Give us a rough time scale, because you've said how important it is that in order we as a council, we do build trust. Communication is going to be really important. It's just as important as things like cultural change and that kind of thing. We can change within the organisation, but we need to obviously rebuild those relationships as well with the community. It's like, can we have a rough idea of when we will have, even if it's a draft strategy to look at and comment in a bit more depth? Because as I say, at the moment, we're asking to give views on something that's quite aspirational rather than something that's a bit more concrete. So it's a bit difficult for me, and I'm sure it's more difficult for members to look at some of these lines and think, well, that's fine, but how are we going to do it? Let's have some tangible examples. So when will we have a bit more meat on the bone?
So I mean, this was a bit of a trial in many ways to come so early, literally at the beginning of the process, and sort of sense from you, is this broadly the right direction of travel? Does this feel right to you in terms of what you're hearing? I can now go away. Some of the things you've said actually have made me rethink some of what's in there or what's not in there. I need to go away and write that, talking to members of SLT and Cabinet, and come back in the autumn, I would suggest. If I don't want to spend ages agreeing on a document. We want to get going with a lot of it. So I think the autumn should be realistic and allow us to then get moving, if that works for you.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. Okay, and just a couple of other questions. I mean, I'm interested to know, I mean, obviously you're looking at a communication strategy as someone who's fairly recently arrived. What are in a nutshell, what is it we've been doing wrong, do you think, up until now that we will now change?
So I looked back at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee from a year ago maybe, when a previous strategy was discussed. Actually, a lot of the elements in there were quite good. I think from what you've said today, a lot of the day-to-day communications that we do, which requires a different approach. It will require training for frontline staff. It will require probably a toolkit for people in housing or regeneration or whatever. So I think, and it is about visibility. Everything you've said is about conversations. It's about people not feeling that they get to talk to us. Now, some of that sits with Dan. It's the customer services. It's the contact centre, etc. Some of it sits in departments. So I think there's a lot to do on that just basic, really basic, as you've said, tone, plain English, day-to-day communications. I think the general approach, the kind of the traditional ways we communicate, to Councillor Kerrin's point earlier, we have interest from the media, we get quite a lot of stories out there. I don't think that's particularly problematic. We're growing our e-newsletter. We've got about numbers-wise, about half of our residents are signed up to it. Now, that won't be an exact science because some, you get other people, random people signing up to things, but that's a really good number of people we're getting out to. We get good engagement with our social media. So I think it really is more on the engagement side where the focus needs to be and where we really need to be much more visible in the community, working with the forums, working with other community groups and getting out and having those two-way conversations. So that is how we are going to sort of change the nature of the relationship the council has with people.
Thank you. So if there are no final comments or questions, can I just say thank you very much for coming here tonight and presenting this paper. I hope we've given you something to take away, and we look forward to it coming back at a later stage for us to have a look at the things in more detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening and for engaging so well. It's been incredibly helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So we now move on to item 8, which is Workforce and Culture Task and Finish Group. I think we're due to have a verbal discussion on that. And Dan, are you taking this?
Yeah, I can do my best. Unfortunately, Tina Dempsey, who's our acting AD for HR and AD, couldn't make it tonight, was potentially available on Teams, but that didn't work out. So I can try and give an outline. And obviously, as it's a verbal discussion, I'm quite happy if we're suggesting things that aren't quite what you meant or wanted to meet, then we can take that on board and come back to you with some thoughts on what you can look at under this head. I think, as you know, there's a change programme in the council. One of the absolutely crucial issues within there is the question of culture change and shifting from, I think you've in the previous discussion described some of that culture, as manifested through it to the council's corporate communications and communications with individuals. And one of the main aims is to shift from that culture to something that is very much focused around asking the question, what do residents want first, and shaping things around that. That's going to be quite multifaceted across different levels, and it could be internal customers. So when we're providing HR or legal services, is shaping that around what do our internal customers, don't particularly like that term inside a council, or it could be members, what are they looking for from support and advice as well. But also in terms of the workforce, there is a work stream specifically around workforce planning, but also culture change there. And we're looking particularly across the board at our policies and procedures. That's something that hasn't been looked at for a considerable period of time. And we're not just looking at, we're looking at them with that new focus. And it would be really helpful for members to kind of have your input into how you think we should take that forward, and also what aspects of that you would like to look at. I mean, just to give you some kind of hard material that might be useful to look at, we have a new developing people strategy, which is aimed at, well, what is the purpose, underlying principles of how we manage staff and what our workforce is for. New performance management arrangements as well with regard to the performance of staff, but also more broadly in the council. We've recently undertaken a staff survey, which has had some, quite challenging results, if I'm perfectly honest, but it gives you some evidence around where staff are feeling the organisation is at and how they're feeling about their roles, their management, the future, etc. And also what we're, as I say, indicated at the start, one of the things we're trying to look at is that revamp of our suite of policies with regard to employee engagement and employee management, which would include, and we want to potentially, what are our top 5 policies? And so, for example, around disciplinary, grievance, bullying, absence and harassment are examples of that, but there are others. And so, just as a starter for 10, those are the things you might want to think about looking at, but obviously it's really open to you about, are there other areas? Also, not just, it's not just our services in corporate services leading culture change. It has to be across the department. There are changes around governance, around decision making, etc. And obviously we can lead in terms of bringing to you officers who can provide evidence or area or further data and information that you might need. So I'm open to answering any questions on that. Hopefully that's been helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Howden.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Thank you, Chair. With regards to culture, I think I've made this rant a couple of times. I don't think you've had the pleasure of hearing it, so you can hear it now. One of the things that hurts the culture so much in this building is the fact that there is no appropriate forum to deal with the low-level, niggly problems. You know, half the either fights between opposition and cabinet or the fight between members and officers happen on quite a low level. They're not matters of high policy. They're quite basic things that we don't have a natural forum to discuss. It's often been a bugbear amongst members that you know, the imposition of locking the front door prevents vulnerable people from coming to talk to the front desk. There is not actually an appropriate forum to raise that. So who does it go to? Does it go to an officer? Does it go to the portfolio holder? Recently I had not a complaint, I had a concern with the relatively poor job that was done of one of the parks in my ward. And I got invited to submit a complaint about the maintenance team. I didn't want to submit a complaint, I just wanted the problem dealt with. Of the council. You know, I don't particularly like the way we've moved to minutes that are not attributed to individual members, and the minutes simply say, a member said. Yeah, myself and Councillor Kerrin have served together for 11 years. I've never once found anything he says to be agreeable, and I'm sure he feels the same way. I want minutes that reflect our separate comments. But we don't have... and the reason I'm bringing this up under a discussion about culture is because these are the things, these actual quite comparatively small issues, tend to be the things that boil over into massive disputes. And the example that I gave when we had the Constitution Working Group is what we used in Parliament. We had a liaison committee chaired by the Speaker, cross-party, with civil servants present, and that was the accepted forum where anyone could address problems of the Parliament itself, the functionality of committees, the quality of reports, the maintenance of the building, access to rooms, all of those low-level problems. And I think you'll actually find, if we created some sort of appropriate body, Daniel, that allowed this to happen, allowed that discourse to happen in a safe and controlled and professional way, some of the more either vexatious commentary you get in the chamber or some of the more passive-aggressive emails that just get out of control and just become a bizarre chain rant, we could deal with all of those because there would be an accepted body that everyone could go to before you end up having to start offering formal mediation. So if we could look to something like that, if we deal with the small issues, I generally think a lot of the big issues that poison the culture between members or between members and officers, I honestly think will just dissipate.
Yes, please.
Okay. I mean, there's quite a lot in there, isn't there? But there is a theme around we need to have proportionate responses. So, you know, probably the one that stood out for me is you know, you raise a concern as a member about I don't know what it was, but maybe they didn't do this bit of work or it looks like a shoddy job in the park, and then being forced into a formal process. I mean, if you're a resident, you know, I mean, what will probably happen is 50% of people won't do that, but the problem remains. And so we need, I agree, and it's certainly not just my area to resolve that. And I can see where you're coming from. I'm quite happy to look into where we can, I suppose the point would be it has to be done in the right spirit across the board from both sides, that the aim is to resolve those small issues rather than have them as, going in and they're just perpetual. Because as I said, one of the things I have found coming in as a monitoring officer here is there are a number of things that would, almost all monitoring officers will fall into tit for tat, and we need to get out of that. And everybody just kind of take a breath and say what we're trying to do, resolve things. But I can certainly look at that, what the scope of that would be. We would need to do. But I agree, that does say something about the culture. And, as I say, it's always a concern if a member is treated that way, how would a resident be treated? And we need to just get beyond that, because it also, just from a a sheer efficiency point of view, it's far more work sometimes to just say, to try and say no than it is to say, yep, you're right, we'll go and check that out and solve it. So like a missed bin, it used to be the example that was often given to me. A member would be told, well, report it, and there'll be a missed bin and somebody collect it, rather than just, okay, there's a van going past, we'll just get them to pick it up. But we won't lose the fact that that bin wasn't picked up because it could be a problem in the system. So it's just simple resolution. So I do understand what you're saying. I don't think we'll ever get to a point of resolving all of those, but I think having looking at ways in which we can do that. Because one of the things I could sense also coming into here is might be any similar thing, a kind of low-level frustration with a hell of a lot of things. And one of the main things being a sense from certain members that they felt excluded from how the council is run, and that has then boiled over into probably behaviour that some of those members regret, but you can see to some extent, without excusing it, understand where it's come from. That's one of the things I'm trying to work with some members about. So I can take that away, and whether it falls within this work stream, but I think that might just be, to follow your example, rather than make it part of the task and finish group, why don't we just do it?
Yeah, I think you're right. They are low-level frustrations. The problem is, in this council, we've always had a position that anything that doesn't fall into a neat category of ONS or Cabinet or Directors Board, everything then gets thrown into the General Services Committee. Yeah, the General Services Committee can't become the ultimate arbiter of all problems in this building. And if I could just give you one final example, when I was Cabinet for Social Care, there was a ridiculous situation where a member of the opposition didn't like something I was taking to Cabinet. I would have happily had the conversation with them. The Constitution didn't actually allow me to stop the decision once the decision had been published. And the only recourse for the member of the opposition was to call in my decision. So it froze the entire process for almost 60 days. It dragged me in front of scrutiny. I was wound up, the opposition was wound up. Ultimately, that is still a weakness in the Constitution, because unless you have a formal Constitution working group, you don't actually have a forum for members to sit around with the Chief Executive or the Head of HR and actually go through these issues and actually resolve them. Yeah, I still think we're arguing about the front door periodically. But we don't have a forum to discuss those problems. And that's when it boils over into full council. So essentially what I'm saying, Daniel, is as a part of improving the culture in this building, if we can find a mechanism between officers and members to prevent things from having to go to full council because members feel it's the only way that they're going to get heard, I think ultimately that would be an awful lot healthier.
I think we agree. So I also don't think you need to take it to a committee. So one of the things we've done is, in advance of full council meetings, just have the group leaders talk to each other and just resolve things. What are you doing on this one? What are you doing on this one? And see how the meeting goes. And that can sometimes dissipate some of the frustration, as you say, airing it in full council, and potentially also looking at the group whips meeting to kind of resolve some of the other things. And we can certainly look at that particular aspect. I didn't quite catch what the issue with the front door was. It could be the same frustration I've got, which is it never seems to be open. But
well, yeah, the front door periodically being locked, so as a result, people who want to present themselves as street homeless, they don't actually have a capacity at certain times to present themselves, and the time is quite arbitrary based on when people feel that the situation downstairs is a little bit risky. And again, that sort of conversation boils over into full council because members are not left with an adequate forum other than the very stilted formal processes. We just need a step before the overly formalised process.
Councillor Holloway, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a question in relation to our aspirations on this root and branch reorganisation / restructuring in order to deliver the new corporate plan. I was just wondering, in relation to the staff, who indeed are the frontline ambassadors of the council and can't be taken for granted, and their welfare and responsibility and their duty of care we have got going forward. I was just wondering, how's the dialogue with staff reps going at the moment in relation to the proposals that are that are definitely going to offend them going forward? Are we in a constructive dialogue at the moment with the staff reps in relation to trying to achieve our goals? Because the last thing we want is negative publicity drifting into some kind of industrial dispute when we're actually trying our very, very best to claw our way forward, bring the council back to life and enhance our reputation.
So in respect of formal proposals, obviously we have the recognised trade unions and we're in regular consultation with those, obviously, which isn't always the case. When there's a formal restructure, then there's formal consultation, there's a clear process for that, which certainly I've been through and was a constructive process with regard to some previous restructures. That seems to be working well. One of the things I am looking to do is to try and, because we will have what we're likely to have is a number of smaller restructures over a long period of time, is that we talk to the trade unions about what that timeline will look like so they can make sure that they're aware and able to have the resources, but also a team on the council side that is ready to provide the relevant information at the right time and work together, so you don't get a stilted approach. That when those are not easy times for anybody, particularly the employees affected, that we don't make it worse by dragging it out or not having the information ready or whatever it is. So that on the formal side is what we're doing, but also the informal. There are my AD for HR and OD has regular meetings with the trade union representatives, and including the issue of the adequacy that they have in terms of facility time and resourcing in significant times of change, but also ongoing dialogue about where things are. I think one of the things in terms of so that's the formal side, but we also are trying to engage with staff directly about what are the changes, about trying to demystify some of those things. So again, I lead, or I'm the SRO on the digital change program, and what we started to do is a series of terrible pun bite-sized sessions for showing what other councils are doing using various bits of technology to try and demystify, but also take some of the fear factor out in terms of what those changes might be and open up opportunities. And we had our first session on Monday where Westminster City Council demonstrated how they used two or three programs. They went through, what it does. It wasn't a sales job, so they admitted what the challenges were, the difficulties, how they dealt with staff concerns. There was Q&A, and I think the really impressive thing is I think our workforce is about 2,200, 348 people were on that call watching that session. So I think that's 15% roughly of the workforce were engaged in that. And we have a series of sessions going forward. So we want to have that direct connection so staff feel engaged. And what we want is then to have that feedback back as well about how they can see that. And following that, I had emails from staff about how they had done, how they were leading change and what they'd done and how they were interested in that. Now, I'm not going to try and make out this is all going to be positive, because the reality is these changes will lead to a reduction in jobs, and because we have to save so much money, and we're also looking to modernise services for our residents so that we get to a position where if whatever media residents use to contact us, we get it right first time, which is one of the real basics of customer service. But we are also, as I say, making that effort to engage with our staff and also take their ideas on board. And as I say, the staff survey that we've just done was a way of measuring and the temperature, so to speak, of how staff are feeling about that, and a detailed kind of, we've just relatively recently just got the results, so we're now working out how do we respond to that. There was an all-staff briefing the week before last where those results were discussed, and it was done in a fairly no-holds-barred way of, we were honest about their work, didn't try and put rose-tinted glasses on about them, and there were some tough questions back, and then the leader and the chief executive last week did a face-to-face session with staff, open invite with staff in the theatre across the way, and I think that was, for those, I think there was about 200 people there, was quite warmly received. So, there is that human element as well. And I think, I know from my management of difficult circumstances, being human and being, honest about things, tough times goes a long way. So there's some of the structural things, and also remembering that human element. I don't know if, Louise, there's anything you want to add from your side around comms on change?
I think, again, consistency with the external communications, it is about tone, it's about recognising what people have been through, it's about trying to regain trust. I know that's not popular, but it is important, particularly with staff, because I think, a lot of them are the ones out getting the anger from our residents, and, they are the face of the council, so we need them to show that we're supporting them through it all. And we, as Dan says, we've been doing a lot more engagement with staff, and we're continuing to just try and keep them engaged and involved, and not feel like things are being done to them, but that they can be involved in that process as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? No. Thank you. Is there anything, from your perspective, we as a committee, how do you think we can monitor, partake, change, steer the cultural change?
I think from listening to the previous challenge to Louise, and I'm relatively new here, I've been through a very similar thing in Liverpool before, and all those feelings are exactly the same. And I think one of the things staff would say, they absolutely hated the council having a bad reputation, because they were, it was colleagues, neighbours, people, and that was one of the things. They just wanted to be back and proud of working for the council again. So I've seen it in two different places, and I think what we would probably like to do, and we can try and shape it for you, is when we develop policies or approaches, is to test it against what your experience of residents feel, or how it feels to you. Is it the right direction? Are we tone deaf to certain things? Because you're the ones who, it's what I always say to my staff. We're never the ones who have to knock on doors. Not yet, anyway. And actually, to be fair, there are a lot of frontline staff, and I'm probably talking about myself. I don't have to knock on doors and face that wrath, or face that lack of trust, or face that kind of, disbelief that we can deliver anything competently, all those things. And I think that challenge, that have we got the tone right, and also what because I think I saw today something like 67% of the council staff are also local residents, so there's a real crossover there. I suppose, are we going in the right direction is really probably what we would ask. I think that some of these things will be quite technical documents, but that grip on sort of real life would probably be really helpful to us.
Okay, thank you. I've got a feeling this will probably be something we return to further down the line. Certainly some things to think about there for us as a committee. Cultural change, mending that relationship between members and officers is part of the cultural change. It's not just about staff, and I think Councillor Alden made a very valid point that I still don't think we are there's been huge progress, there's no question of it. Anyone who's been a councillor for a few years can see the member-officer relationships are immensely improved. It helps that we've got competent senior officers before, which we didn't have in the past, and we have engaging senior officers, whereas we didn't in the past. And we don't have senior officers who think that members are an inconvenience, which we had in the past. But there's probably still a bit of work to do to mend that and convince members that it is a lasting change. It's not, we're not just doing it for the time being while the commissioners are looking. So my only comment really is there's lots of talk about how we build relationships with staff and change the culture there. We shouldn't be blind to the fact that we also need to concentrate on building those relationships with members and making sure that they're cemented. And as I say, we're not just doing things because we think people are looking. There's a job of work to be done there as well, I think. So my only point to you, if you could just, I'd implore you to bear that in mind. You have to carry members with us. We have to mend the democratic process and those relationships. So that needs to be just as embedded, I think. So before we move on, no more questions or comments? In that case, thanks very much. We move on to the work programme at item 9. It's in the agenda. Are there, I mean, I suppose the first question is, first of all, are the things on the work programme, things that we agree we should be looking into over the remainder of the year? And are there things that we think, perhaps having listened to some of the presentations tonight, are there other things we think that should be on the work programme? I'll throw it open to comments. Councillor Abbas?
Obviously, we are also expecting a report, updated report on communication strategy. But if we can have a written update on item 8, please.
Yep, certainly. Is that something we can arrange?
We can do. I'd sort of assumed that you were going, by having a task and finish, you were going to set up a group that would be looking at that. I have noticed that in your October meeting, you do have the people strategy coming, which was one of the documents I mentioned. So it could be that those two things could link together at that meeting and where we are with culture. And I'm more than happy to pick up that issue around member officer culture as well and those little niggles or whatever.
Okay. I've got mixed views on whether there should be a task and finish group. Again, what is the view of members? I suppose I'm having trouble sort of, are we creating a committee before we really know what we're trying to achieve, if I'm honest? Listening to some of the things you've said, I wouldn't want to fall into a situation where we're setting up a task and finish group before we're really clear about what we're looking at, and I'm still a bit vague, if I'm honest, but yeah, sure, you, Lucy.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor. I don't know whether, I'm just throwing this out there, I don't know whether it might be worth having the update on the comm strategy and the people strategy to kind of see what falls out of that before we make a decision about the task and finish, because it might be that the people strategy kind of answers a lot of questions and the comm strategy also answers a lot of questions that members might have, and then if it doesn't, then maybe we can look at setting something up, because the people strategy comes in October, so then we'd still have time back end of the year to maybe consider something.
Councillor Fletcher.
I quite like that idea. I think I'd go a bit beyond that. I mean, I totally agree with you, Chair, that, you know, if we manage to get a task and finish group to sort out workforce structure in a matter of weeks, we could sell that and make millions back, because nobody else has ever managed to do that. I think we need to focus on some kind of concrete, achievable, and I don't think we're in a position tonight to identify what that achievable is. So exactly as Lucy says, I think let's hear back. And it needn't necessarily be communications related. I mean, that's part of culture, but I think we need to identify a specific thing that we think needs to shift. You know, just as we've just been discussing, as James has been discussing, you know, culture sometimes boils down to why the hell is that door always locked? And I'm not suggesting we look at something that small and specific, but we need to say, what do we mean by culture? You know, this needs to improve. What is the improvement? Well, we need to get from here to there. There's your task and finish group. So, as I say, that might be, I suppose what I'm saying is, that might become easier when we hear back from Louise. We might, though, still need to say, well, okay, is it coming out of that, or is there something else that we can fix on that's doable enough and specific enough for a task and finish group to actually have a chance with?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we as a committee can look at some of the things that are coming back and look at cultural change as a committee. Having a task and finish group, I just get the feeling we'd be all looking at each other and thinking, well, what's our remit? I'm not clear from what we've heard what our remit would be. I think as a committee, we can take cultural change at 4 meetings, really. It runs through everything. It's such an important item. I don't think we need a task and finish group for it. That might change, as been suggested. As more things come back, we might think there are clear objectives that a task and finish group would help with, but at the minute I think we're probably waiting to form a judgment on that. We'll need some more information to come back. So, okay, so back to item 9 then, the work programme. I mean, we need to get things on here, and we haven't got an abundance of time, but again, I think probably asking members to throw things out here and now might be a bit difficult, but are there any things, we do have to try and find a way of capturing those things and populating the work programme, because it is very light at the moment. But are there any, I don't want members just sort of throwing forward ideas for the sake of it, but are there, at this early stage, are there any things that members particularly want to see on here? Councillor Howden.
The paper that Alex is presenting on the performance management assurance framework, it says it's just to do with the council's recovery goals. Considering we're the committee dealing with resources, isn't it typical for us to see the KPI dashboard for the authority, just to have a broad sweeping look at performance across the board, not simply performance based on the recovery plan?
It certainly always used to be the case that corporate ONS was the committee where that came to. I don't know. I know there is an ongoing attempt to streamline the committee and not bog down committees with too much detail, but I don't know whether that's why we might not necessarily be seeing that. But Councillor Howden is right. Traditionally, corporate was the place where performance data came to. Is that something we can perhaps get on as a standing item? It almost used to be a standing item. It wasn't, sort of on the work programme, but such it was a standing item.
Yeah, so you're right, it always used to be, and we always used to get the quarterly updates of corporate performance. So I think overall, the issue always was that they were to note reports and that they were just kind of noting, which is something that under the new protocol we're trying to reduce. There might be a way of bringing it back, but my only concern would be that it might just take committee time, just, that there's no real outcomes and scrutiny can't add value. And I think all of us just want to make sure that there are ways that scrutiny can add value to that report. So I can always work with Alex and with Sarah Welton, who's the strategy manager, to see if there's any way that, we might be able to kind of formulate those reports in future so that they can come before committee, or maybe through another avenue. Because it might be better as either as a briefing session or an evidence session, or some way that we can have that so members still have the chance to input and have that overview. Yeah, I can take that away.
No, I think it was clear. I mean, having been a chair in the past of this committee, you're right. It did seem at one point that the sole function of the committee was to look at numbers, performance data. On the other hand, if it's not reported here, where is it reported to, and where is it properly scrutinised? So, there is a balance to be had. Going back to the way we were would be completely ineffective, but at the same time, as Councillor Howden said, it does need to be scrutinised somewhere, so we probably do need to find a way of embedding it somehow without going back to the way things used to be. Any other suggestions? Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to suggest that we get a couple of sessions in reporting back on the corporate plan, how it's being rolled out, and how it's actually starting to impact plans, goals, etc., for the different directorates. Because looking at this, we've got a couple of gaps which kind of look like they would kind of support a bit of an iterative report, for want of a better word. And I think with the corporate plan, the thing I'd like to hear about it, and hopefully I'm not alone, is great, plan looks fantastic. How's it rolling out? What barriers, hopefully none, but what barriers might it be hitting? How's it starting to make itself felt in the work of the different directorates? And I think if we had, September, October to discuss how the plan has been rolled out, and then I'll be honest, looking at the next short month, say February, to start looking at how it's been embedded into the plans for the directorates. And then, I don't know, that gives us, March is the last one, but I think at least 2 feel right to me. So how's it being rolled out across the council, and where's it cropping up in the actual concrete plans for the directorates? Sorry, I think I've said the same thing 3 times. I'll shut up now.
I would agree with that too. I mean, I think it would be remiss of us really if we didn't somehow look at the local plan and how it's being embedded, and if we didn't measure it some way. So I would agree with that. It should come here. I think we've got perhaps one. We had a long discussion obviously about the comm strategy. I think we've agreed that that should come back at some stage when there's more for us to look at. Again, I'll throw this out to members, but at the informal meeting, the leader actually asked that perhaps we as a committee look at the list of, or the number of outside organisations and different different bodies that we as a local authority are members of, and whether we get much back from that, whether there's a cost to it. I certainly know, having been a portfolio holder, that in my area we paid a subscription to be a member of an organisation that I don't think we ever got much out of at all. I'm sure we've got them across the board. So that was a suggestion, not a request, but a suggestion from the leader that we look at that. I mean, is that something that the committee will be happy to look at in more detail? I think it's it shouldn't be a lengthy exercise, but I think it's something we should do. And the only other thing from me, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about how we deal with how we improve digital services, how we improve customer experience. I hate that word, we do. I don't think there's been enough focus for a lot of years actually on how we deal with members' inquiries. I think actually overall the service we get as members is poor. I don't know whether, I think it's high time we had a root and branch look at that, how we do it, how we can improve it. It's certainly been, I think that's come out of the meeting tonight, it's certainly been a sore point for a long time, and it's in no small part gone some way to damaging relations between members and officers. I think when you look at some of the responses we get and the tone of some of those responses and time frames, I would like to look at how we do members' inquiries, how other local authorities deal with members' inquiries, because members' inquiries are 9 times out of 10 inquiries from members of the public. Certainly when I'm raising an inquiry, they're normally because a constituent has asked me to. Again, is that something the committee would be happy to look at? Okay, can we add that to the work programme?
Thanks, Chair. I just also wanted to raise that for the December meeting, we're also mainly focusing on the budget and the 5-year medium financial term plan as well. And for February, it'd be sort of that final budget sign-off as well. So that's sort of the big priority for the committee as well. Just kind of wanted to highlight that.
Okay, well, we've had lots of discussion about, looking at a smaller number of things and getting better quality outcomes rather than sort of filling the work programme and having a whistle-stop tour of different things. So I'm keen to make sure that happens, that we look at items properly even if that means fewer areas rather than just filling out the work programme and not really getting under the skin of things. So I think, for now, I think that is enough. Members, do we agree that that's enough speaking of? It will change, it will evolve, obviously, over the course of the year, but bearing in mind what you said about the budget, which will obviously take up the back end of this year, will take up nearly all of our time as a committee. I think we've got enough to be getting on with, so to speak. Okay. So before we close, are there any other comments, anything that anyone wants to bring up? No? Thank you. Thank you for everyone for attending. I think it's been a good meeting, and I'll close the meeting now at 8:49.